Did you know that the United States carries a debt so enormous that it's bigger than the combined GDPs of Germany, Japan, and Spain? $9.2 trillion that could make the world's most powerful economy collapse in 2025. What would this mean for the global economy? In this video, I'm going to explain something baffling. Why Trump is taking actions that seem to contradict his promises, deliberately cooling down the economy. This risky strategy could be both political suicide and the only way to avoid a total collapse. Stay tuned to discover the most dangerous economic gamble of our time. If you're liking the video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos. Let's continue. The ticking time bomb. Why the US debt threatens to explode in 2025. Have you ever wondered why the US now spends more on interest payments than its entire military budget? This is just the tip of the iceberg of a much bigger problem. We are facing a financial time bomb that could explode sooner than you think. The US debt has reached historic levels not seen since World War II, with a total of $36 trillion and $9.2 trillion due in 2025. This means that the government has to refinance a huge amount in just a few months. It's like having to refinance your mortgage. But now with much higher interest rates, suddenly doubling your monthly payment. The main problem is that the cost of interest has doubled since 2020. What was once manageable is now consuming more and more resources, like a balloon inflating uncontrollably. Imagine, interest payments already exceed everything the US spends on its military. All of America's military might cost less than the interest on its debt. The 2024 fiscal deficit reached $1.8 trillion, creating a vicious cycle where more debt is needed to pay interest on previous debt. It's like using one credit card to pay off another, and then taking out another loan to cover those debts. This situation is very different from what happened after World War II. In 1946, US debt also represented about 118% of GDP, but it fell rapidly thanks to the post-war economic boom. Workers were returning, families were growing, and the economy was growing at 4 or 5% a year. Today, we are barely reaching 2% growth, while interest rates are at 2-decade highs, making everything much more difficult to manage. To make matters worse, traditional buyers of US debt are withdrawing. China has significantly reduced its purchases, and the Federal Reserve itself is winding down its bond buying program. This forces the government to rely more on individual investors and mutual funds, which could push rates even higher if demand falls. The average interest rate on all federal debt rose to 3.28% at the end of 2024, more than double what it was in 2020. With $36 trillion in debt, this small increase represents hundreds of billions of dollars extra each year in interest alone, as if every US citizen had to pay thousands of dollars extra annually. The outlook becomes more complicated in 2026, when baby boomers begin to retire en masse, increasing spending on pensions and healthcare. Millions who contributed to the system will start receiving benefits without enough young people to support them. It is like a family with more and more elderly people to support, but fewer and fewer members working. If this trend continues, soon much of the federal budget will go solely to paying interest, leaving essential areas such as defense, education, or infrastructure unfunded. Imagine a country that cannot afford to maintain its army or repair its dilapidated bridges and roads. Budget pressure is already evident. Social programs that millions take for granted could face drastic cuts. Investment in scientific research, fundamental to US technological leadership, could be reduced, and the ability to respond to future crises, whether pandemics or natural disasters, would be seriously compromised. The Trump paradox. Cooling down the economy to save it. As the federal debt crisis intensifies, Trump has adopted a strategy seemingly taken from a crisis economics handbook, intentionally slowing down economic growth. Is it possible that the only way to save the American economy is, ironically, to weaken it first? When Donald Trump took office in 2016, his message was clear: soaring markets, jobs returning to America, and economic growth like never before. Now, in his second term, the landscape has changed dramatically. The Trump of 2024 seems to have embraced an economic philosophy completely opposite to the one he previously defended. Scott Bessent, his new Treasury Secretary, has made this new vision clear. The Trump administration is consciously allowing the stock markets to fall and economic expectations to cool down. At first glance, this decision seems like political suicide. What president would want to see the markets fall during their term? However, behind this apparent madness lies a cold and calculated plan. Besant has compared the current situation to that of a diabetic patient who needs a strict diet. Excessive public spending is like sugar that weakens the economy. Just as a diabetic must eliminate sweets to avoid fatal complications, the austerity diet can save the economy, even if it causes short-term pain. This strategy has two main objectives. The first is to reduce inflation by slowing down consumption. By cooling down the economy, prices tend to stabilize or even go down, which would ease the pressure on American households. The second objective is to pressure the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, significantly reducing the cost of refinancing the enormous federal debt. Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, has warned that Trump's strategy is comparable to putting out a fire with gasoline. This criticism suggests that, although it could work, the margin for error is extremely small. One wrong step could transform a controlled recession into a deep and prolonged crisis. This approach is reminiscent of Paul Volcker's drastic measures in 1981, when he raised interest rates to 20% to combat inflation, triggering a recession that paved the way for the growth of the 1990s. Tariffs act as strategic pillars in this Trumpian economic edifice. They are simultaneously a geopolitical weapon against trade rivals, an international bargaining tool, and a source of revenue for the federal government at a time of extreme budgetary pressure, although consumers end up paying higher prices. The bond market has reacted nervously to this uncertainty. Treasury bond yields have risen significantly as investors express concern about the sustainability of US debt. The rising costs associated with this enormous debt complicate the situation, especially with interest rates that have risen dramatically since 2022. Besant has been emphatic in pointing out that immediate economic pain may be necessary for long-term survival. He has cited the austerity measures implemented in Greece during its financial crisis as an example of necessary sacrifices. The crucial difference is that the United States has the advantage of issuing the world's reserve currency, giving it greater flexibility than Greece had. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos. Let's continue. Global lessons: Europe and the mirror of the Greek crisis. Across the Atlantic, the debt experiment is already in its final stages. While the United States debates its economic future, Europe is living with the consequences of ignoring fiscal warning signs for decades. The European Union is burdened with a debt exceeding 90% of its GDP, but what's truly alarming are the extreme cases. Italy shoulders 142% debt to GDP ratio, and Greece a devastating 160%. These numbers offer a glimpse into a possible American future if it continues on its current borrowing path. The European situation is concerning because the problem has spread even to strong economies. France has a 5.5% deficit, while Germany, the historical guardian of fiscal discipline, has recorded a 2.8% deficit for the first time in over a decade. The European Central Bank maintains high interest rates that are unsustainable for weaker economies, creating a storm of high borrowing and costly debt service. The European model shows structural cracks, with the ECB carrying 7 trillion negative euros on its balance sheet. To understand this better, it's as if a family kept using credit cards to pay off other outstanding debts, knowing that at some point, someone will have to take on those payments. This financial hole reveals the unsustainability of the European model, a generous welfare state financed by cheap debt that must now face reality. The aging population is exacerbating this crisis. 22% of European citizens are over 65, putting an unbearable strain on pensions and healthcare when public coffers are emptier than ever. Despite this reality, governments continue to resort to more subsidies, fueling the vicious cycle of indebtedness. Japan represents the extreme case of debt monetization, with 260% of GDP. Despite its central bank buying 90% of government debt, the result has been a 40% depreciation of the yen against the dollar since 2020. This fall shows that not even an advanced economy can escape fundamental economic laws. The Greek crisis of 2010 offers painful but valuable lessons for the United States. When Greek finances collapsed, the country implemented austerity measures that contracted its GDP by 25% and shot unemployment to 27%. The streets of Athens were filled with protests as desperate citizens formed endless lines at banks to withdraw the few euros allowed daily, as they watched their savings and pensions vanish before their eyes. However, that painful medicine has yielded results. Today, Greece maintains a primary surplus in its public accounts and attracts foreign investment. Tourism has rebounded, and new industries are flourishing in a country that hit rock bottom and began to rebuild from a more solid foundation. To avoid repeating this tragedy on a larger scale, both Europe and the United States need a new deal for productivity. This would involve unpopular but necessary decisions, drastically reducing the number of civil servants, raising the retirement age, and eliminating subsidies to non-strategic industries. The lessons from across the Atlantic are clear. Postponing these tough choices only guarantees a more painful awakening when fiscal reality finally comes knocking. We've reached the end of our analysis. Trump's strategy is like a financial detox, where immediate pain becomes the price of economic survival. The American economy is at a historic crossroads. Continuing to spend without control guarantees a future where debt consumes every available resource, while the alternative, though painful, offers hope for recovery. Like a doctor applying a tough but necessary treatment, what would you do with your own finances during a similar crisis? Sometimes, the hardest path is the only one that guarantees survival. Time will tell if this economic gamble will bring healing or push us towards a bigger abyss. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.